I show you here the simulation tool we developed within the DARWIN project, and on the screen you can see the pilot 4 trial. It's a scenario where a ferry had an accident and different helicopters and ships are going to rescue the patients from the ferry, bring them to different assembly points, and afterwards ambulances are taking the patients to the hospitals. With this simulation tool, you can easily detect what strategies you should use and you could use to bring the patients on a most efficient and fastest way from the ferry to the hospitals. And with this simulation tool, you can run it in real time, like we are almost doing now, but you can also do it in fast time, meaning you can apply different strategies on allocation, on number of resources, for example, and then you see easily how this will influence the result, being the patients coming to the hospitals. And with that, you could, for example, take the different concept cards to detect the bottlenecks, but also to test the communication between different stakeholders. Like we just have implemented good communication between all organizations involved, but it's easily to just cut this this communication off, and then you will have an organization responsible for the ferries, for the ambulances, for example, and then you will see that the outcome is completely different. For example, that a lot of ambulances will be on stack and waiting for patients which may be already at the hospital. So this is a very powerful tool which can be used before a scenario, during a scenario, or even during a crisis, and afterwards to make analyze how good the scenario went and what could have been done better to make the best usage of all resources. Right now you can see on the map the scenario where the ferry in the middle of the lines has its accident and helicopters are going to the ship, as well as other rescue ships are heading for this vessel, taking the patients on board, bringing them back to the coastline, to the assembly points where ambulances are now heading towards the red lines or red dots, are the ambulances going to these assembly points and taking patients on board to bring them to hospital, while helicopters are going back and forth to the vessel and to the assembly points, like the other ships are also doing. Now it's a little bit more zoomed in with the red dots, red lines on the land side, and the blue dots and lines on the seaside. We have not modeled with these straight red lines actually the roads itself, but we have taken into account the distances from the assembly points to the hospital, but for the depiction it's just a straight line going from the assembly point back to the hospitals. This is a training tool which will help decision makers to learn how to employ or how to facilitate their resources best, but it will also help, for example, decision makers on a higher level, how different approaches will help them to get the right number of resources, to the right number of ambulances, and so on. So it's a training, but also a tool helping decision makers to get the next step, for example, to implement concept cards, to implement new strategies. We do have in mind that this tool can be used by organizations to facilitate their resources, but it can also be used by decision makers from ministry level down to local government level on the connection between organizations. So there are different possibilities on possible end users for this tool, definitely. This tool will help you, will help us to make a system more resilient, because we can train and we can check how different concepts will affect the reaction to a crisis. Like if the network is well established, if the communication is well established, if the people are trained and do know what to do, not only within an organization but also inter-organization wise, and therefore the resilience on a local but also on a global base will be improved by this tool. Besides the resilience aspects, there are much more benefits of the toolset, because it can be used also by organizations, by large organizations, to utilize their resources in an optimized manner. Like if you have, for example, an airline who is trying to use their fleet or to improve their turnaround on an airport, then with such a simulation environment you can detect the bottlenecks in the current approach, in the current concept, and you can improve your daily business. So it's not only for resilience, it's not only for crisis management, but there are much more possibilities with the tool to detect the work of an organization or of a system.